You're not living, you're repeating. You wake up, you do your tasks, you distract yourself, you survive, but you know something's wrong. It's not just tiredness, it's like you're living someone else's life, like you're in a body you didn't choose, following a script you never wrote. This pain that has no name is not a defect, it's a sign, a warning that what you call life might just be the pre-death of your true self. This video is not an answer. It is a mirror. It will not comfort you. It will pierce you, because it is not about physical death. It is about the death of everything that keeps you asleep. And if you stick around until the end, you will understand that the only way to live with truth is to die to everything that is a lie. And that's where Anubis comes in. You are not here by chance. There are forces operating beyond the surface, and Anubis is one of those presences that does not speak, he observes. He does not shout, he guides. From the oldest inscriptions on stone walls to the symbolic dreams of modern seekers, he stands as a guardian between worlds. To go through life without acknowledging his shadow is to remain incomplete. Anubis does not call to you with words, but with inexplicable sensations. That silent restlessness that haunts you when everything seems too normal. Anubis is not the end. He is the gateway. When the ancient Egyptians depicted him with the head of a jackal, they were encoding something that goes beyond aesthetics. The jackal sniffs out the invisible, detects death before it shows itself. This archetype connects to the human being who intuits, who feels what is unsaid, who perceives what the eyes do not see. Anubis represents the silent call of the soul to remember its origin. He does not push. He waits for you to listen. Have you ever felt this? The feeling of being watched, not with human eyes, but with an ancient consciousness. There is no judgment, just a mirror. Anubis does not point his finger. He reveals what is already inside you. He holds a scale not to condemn you, but to show you the weight of the illusions you have accepted to carry. In his silence, he asks, what in you needs to die so that the true self can be born? Anubis's presence manifests itself when the mask begins to fall. He appears in crises, in losses, in breakups, not as destruction, but as opportunity. He is the space between the last breath and the first insight. And if you have the courage to face what lies behind the fear of death, he will not be a dark god, but an ally. A guide who will guide you through the veils of illusion to the clarity of being. In Egyptian tradition, Anubis was not a minor god. He was responsible for weighing the hearts of the dead. Not to punish them, but to reveal whether they had lived truthfully. A light heart was a sign of a life of integrity. A heavy heart was a sign of imprisonment by the lies of the ego. This judgment is not symbolic. It happens now here every time you come closer to or move away from your essence. You don't have to die physically to meet Anubis. Just start dying to what isn't real, to the roles you've accepted without question, to the fears you've been taught. He's waiting for you at the crossing, not with promises, but with a mirror. And in that mirror, you'll see that you were never a limited being seeking salvation, but a forgotten spark of the divine in your own nature. And the first step is to remember. Since you were born, you have been taught that death is the worst of evils. You have been shown coffins, tears, endings. They have made death an enemy, a ghost to be avoided, a taboo to be silenced. But they have never told you that true control does not come with chains. It comes with invisible fears. And of all fears, the most effective is the fear of ceasing to exist. The system does not want you to understand death. It wants you to run away from it. Because those who fear death accepts anything just to stay functional. You don't need a prison when you fear death. All you need is a ticket, a line, a routine. All you need is a system that promises survival in exchange for your surrender. Death, in this context, becomes a device, a trigger, spiritual blackmail. Everything is designed so that you can never approach that word without feeling fear. And so, ironically, you never live. You just avoid dying. And this form of passive existence is exactly where the system flourishes. What they call life is often just a careful management of fear. They teach you to save, to plan, to be prudent. But all of this is fear disguised as virtue. You choose professions for stability. You stay in relationships that are the least bit bad. You fake smiles because of what others will think. And with that dies inside in soft installments. You no longer feel your own soul. You only feel the schedule, the alarm clock, the deadline. Anubis appears when all this starts to fail, when you can no longer pretend, when your body gets sick for no apparent reason, when your goals no longer make sense, when your soul starts to leak. This is when most people try to numb themselves. More distractions, more consumption, more content. But a few stop. They look, and they ask themselves, what inside me is trying to die, and I won't let it. This is when the journey begins. True death does not happen when the heart stops beating. It happens when the soul stops pulsing, when you disconnect from your essence and start acting. And the more you run away from death, the further you move away from real life. Because living fully requires dying several times. Dying to expectations, to the image they created of you, to the roles you accepted without question. And the system does not want that to happen, because a being that does not fear dying is impossible to control. That is why Anubis as a symbol is so feared, and at the same time so necessary. He does not represent destruction. He represents liberation. He does not want your pain. He wants your truth. And truth only emerges when illusions die, when the false self falls, when you look death in the face, not as an end, but as a passage, and realize that it is not fear that should guide you, it is presence. Because those who live running away from death never learn to live. The death you've been told so much about isn't the only one that exists. There's another one, silent, invisible, internal, that happens when you stop being who they said you needed to be. This is the death most feared, by the ego, the dissolution of the persona. It doesn't happen with flowers or funerals. It happens with silence, with the feeling of being lost, with the realization that nothing fits anymore. And even without blood, this death hurts. Because in it, it's not the body that goes away. It's the illusion. This is the death Anubis wants you to embrace. Not as an end, but as a purification. He doesn't want you to suffer. He wants you to let go of what was never yours. The inherited beliefs, the programmed fears, the borrowed dreams, everything you took on to fit into a world that never understood you. This death is difficult because it doesn't kill the body. She kills the lie. And the lie defends itself until the last breath. You feel it when you start to drift away from who you were, when conversations lose their meaning, when familiar places become unbearable, when even your own voice seems strange. You are dying to the false self, and so everything feels empty. You are not lost. You're being stripped away. The layers are falling away, and who you were is being buried. Not to hurt you, but so that what is real can finally emerge. Many resist this inner death. They try to get back into character. They cover themselves with distractions, reinforce their titles, run after new goals, all so as not to feel the emptiness. But emptiness is the womb of reality. The ego fears silence because it knows that it cannot survive there. And that is why Anubis does not speak with words. He waits in silence. It waits for you to grow tired of the noise of the world. It waits for you to surrender to the truth that doesn't need to be explained. This is where awakening begins. Not in books, not in theories, but on the cold ground of the crossing, when you no longer know who you are. And for the first time, it doesn't make you despair, because in this space something new breathes, something ancient, something that has always been there, but never had room to flourish. The true self, the essence, the presence that observes everything without needing to protect itself. Because she has nothing to hide. Anubis leads you to this border. He does not cross for you. He only lights the door. And whoever passes never returns the same. Because whoever dies to the lie, born for freedom. And it is this death that the system fears. Because a being that is reborn consciously can no longer be tamed. And the world begins to change, not because someone said something, but because someone finally chose to be what they are. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there is an image that has stood the test of time. Anubis weighing the dead man's heart against a feather. The feather represents Ma'at, truth, order, universal balance. If the heart is lighter, the soul is freed. If it is heavier, it is devoured. But this is not a story of the afterlife. It is a mirror of the now, because your heart is already being weighed. Not after death, but every time you pretend to be someone you're not. The heart becomes heavy with what you keep silent, with the truths you repress so as not to displease, with the dreams you bury for fear of appearing crazy, with the words you swallow to keep the peace. None of this disappears. It goes straight to the scale. And one day, without warning, the Ayyib soul feels the excess, an anguish without a name, a pain without a cause, a weight that no examination can detect. Anubis is not waiting for your physical death. He is here now, watching how long you can bear to live apart from yourself. The judgment is not moral, it is energetic. The universe does not punish you. It only shows you what you carry. And if you feel stuck, tired, lost, maybe it is not bad luck. Maybe it is just the echo of a heart that has become too heavy. And the only way to relieve that weight is it's not running. It's remembering. You need to ask yourself, what is weighing me down? What stories am I telling to appear acceptable? What pacts have I made with fear? What masks am I holding on to so tightly that I have forgotten who I am without them? These questions are the weight on the scale, and they do not lie. You can fool the whole world with your performance, but you cannot fool your own vibrational field. The heart knows. The body knows. The soul screams, even if you don't hear it. The judgment of the heart is the point where self-deception begins to crumble. When you realize that lightness does not come from running away from the world, but from no longer carrying anything that is not yours. It is not about becoming a saint nor immaculate. It is about stopping sustaining characters. It is about looking within and realizing that many of the pains you carry are contracts that could have already been torn up, if only you had the courage to do so. Be real. Anubis stands before the scales. He does not condemn. He does not absolve. He only reveals. And the greatest revelation does not come from outside. It comes when you see your own reflection and do not look away. Because the light-hearted is not that of someone who made few mistakes. It is that of someone who no longer carries the weight of his own disguises. And this lightness is the passport to the crossing. The death that scares you the most is not the death of your body. It's the death of your character. The system taught you to be someone, to build an image, to maintain a reputation, to defend an identity as if your life depended on it. But what they call you is a collage of expectations, traumas, and fantasies. You were shaped to survive, not to be true. And the greatest prison is not external. It's the fear of letting this you die. Anubis as a symbol does not want your destruction. He wants your liberation. He invites you to die in life, not in your body, but in your ego. Because as long as you insist on protecting the image you created, you will remain distant from the essence you came to embody. The art of dying before you die is the art of unlearning, of letting go of titles, labels, stories. It is not about losing everything. It is about losing what was never yours in the first place. The ego will resist. It will scream, sabotage, seduce. It will try to convince you that without it, you will dissolve. But that is a lie. The ego is a bodyguard of false identity. It feeds on control, comparison, and fear. And when you start to dismantle this structure, you feel like you are dying. And you are. But it is not you who dies, it's the character that occupied his place. Most people spend their lives defending a mask. They mold their words to please. They repress their pain to appear strong. They hide their light so as not to disturb. This is tiring. This makes you sick. This kills you slowly. Anubis appears at the limit of this exhaustion. He offers you a symbolic shovel and says, dig. Dig until you bury everything that was never you. Your forced versions, your inherited truths, your layers of defense. Dying before you die is the only way to be born whole, not as a new version of the same ego, but as something beyond form, something that doesn't need to defend itself or prove itself. The soul doesn't need applause, it just needs space, and that space only appears when you have the courage to strip yourself, not of others but of yourself, not of the clothes but of the layers you've worn to survive. Anubis guides this process firmly, not in a hurry. He walks with those who choose to let die what prevents the light from passing through, because only those who die to the character can hear the voice of the soul. Only those who let go of the false find the sacred, and that is true initiation. You do not become enlightened by adding things. You become enlightened by removing what obscures. And the first step is to accept dying while still alive. The biggest lie you've been told about death is that it means ending, that what dies disappears, that everything ends there. But ancient civilizations never thought that way. For them, death was a process, a change of form, a transition of vibrational state. Just as ice turns to vapor, the soul changes density. Consciousness moves. It does not extinguish. The body is buried. The essence follows. Egypt did not view death with terror. They saw it as a journey. They did not embalm bodies out of attachment to the physical, but out of reverence for what had lived there. They prepared the dead as if they were preparing an interstellar traveler. Every rite, every symbol, every word in the Book of the Dead was a spiritual technology, a codification that helped the soul remember who it was and where it needed to. Anubis was the operator of this portal. This wisdom has been systematically erased. The West has turned death into a taboo, a silence, a trauma. It has stripped it of its sacredness. It has transformed the end of the body into a defeat, a failure of medicine. But this is not true. Death is a sacred process. It is a mechanism of cosmic adjustment. When understood, it becomes liberation. When feared, it becomes prison. And the current system prefers that you fear it, because those who fear death cling to their bodies, to control, to routine. They run away from change. They reject the new. They seek security at any cost, and this attachment generates stagnation. It generates rigidity. It generates suffering. Death only hurts when you refuse to die, because it is not the end that hurts. It is the resistance to the end. Ancient traditions taught the opposite: surrender, trust. The crossing is necessary. What is on the other side is not the void. It is you on another level. Anubis as an archetype is the engineer of conscious dissolution. He doesn't take you, he helps you through. He knows the codes of the soul. He doesn't force, he reveals. And what he shows is that death, when properly understood, is the updating of being. It's the download of a lighter, more subtle, more real version of yourself. But only if you accept dying to what has become obsolete. When you stop resisting symbolic death, something changes. Fear begins to dissolve. Attachment turns into presence. And you realize that dying is not about ceasing to exist. It is about ceasing to carry what was never yours. And it is in this space that the sacred can finally breathe. Death is not the end. It is the most precise tool the universe has created to ensure that nothing remains imprisoned in what should have already been left behind. Anubis was never a vengeful god. He does not punish. He does not chastise. He only observes and reveals. His presence does not bring condemnation but mirrors. And that is why many fear him. Because the greatest human fear is not being judged by the universe. It is having to look at yourself without the masks, without the filters, without the excuses, and see with brutal clarity what is keeping your soul trapped in cycles you pretend not to see. When Anubis looks at you, he doesn't want answers. He wants you to stop running. Because as long as you blame the world, the past, others, you will remain blind to the root of your pain. And the truth is that what blocks you the most is not the trauma. It's the attachment to the version of yourself that trauma created. The victim, the hero, the conformist, the rational. Characters you've played for so long that you've forgotten what it was like to exist without playing them. Anubis doesn't need to speak. His presence dismantles. He holds the mirror up to your soul and asks, "Is this you?" And in that awkward silence, you realize that you've been hiding from yourself, that you've been avoiding feeling, that you've been rationalizing too much, rushing too much, explaining too much. All so as not to touch that raw pain that still pulsates, buried under layers of functionality. But he insists, he shows it, because only what is seen can be released. Many people seek awakening by running away from pain, seeking light, affirming love and gratitude. But this can also be a disguise. It can be spirituality used as a crutch to avoid internal conflicts. Anubis, on the other hand, does not accept shortcuts. He is not interested in how evolved you seem to be. He wants to know if you are able to face yourself when no one is looking. Because that's where the truth lives. That's where the ritual begins. Seeing what hurts isn't comfortable, but it's liberating. When you have the courage to face what you've been avoiding for years, resentments, lies, masks, addictions, something breaks. The hold those shadows had over you begins to crumble. Not because you've conquered them, but because you've finally seen. And what is seen with presence loses the power to manipulate behind the veil. This is the work of Anubis, to reveal the invisible within you, to bring to light what your ego tries to hide. And in this process, he does not humiliate you. He honors you, because the soul that allows itself to see itself without defending itself is no longer lost. She is coming back from the lie, coming back from the character, coming back from the self-deception. And that coming back is the beginning of real spiritual sovereignty. Most people talk about rebirth as if it were an enlightened event, full of peace, gratitude, and white light. But true spiritual rebirth is messy, lonely, and often devastating. It begins when everything you believed about yourself falls apart, when your certainties no longer make sense, when the supports that held your identity together begin to crumble, and you no longer know who you are or who you should be. There are no flowers in this process. There is silence. There is pain. There is an emptiness that accepts no distractions. This is the point at which the soul begins to rebuild itself, but only after it has demolished what was a lie. And this demolition is not romantic. It is raw. It is an internal dismantling, in which old patterns, beliefs, and self-images are undone without warning. You wake up amid the rubble of your own identity, gasping for air as everything that gave meaning to your previous life seems to have evaporated. There is no manual. There is no guarantee. There is only a brutal sense that nothing can be the same again. True rebirth is less like being born again and more like return from one's own funeral. You were there, under the emotional earth, covered by the expectations of others, buried by a life that pretended to be yours. But then something breaks. A silent impulse, a different breath, a forgotten memory makes you stand up. And when you stand up, the world finds you strange. Because you no longer behave as expected. You no longer repeat the scripts. You no longer smile out of politeness. You no longer accept surviving as if that were enough. This process costs you. You lose friendships. You lose structures. You lose the admiration of others. Because when you start living truthfully, you threaten those who still live in lies. They will say that you have changed, and they will be right. But they will not understand what has changed in you, because what has changed is that you chose to stop acting. You've stopped asking permission to be whole. You've decided that it's no longer worth dividing yourself to be accepted. Rebirth then is not a return to the light. It is a birth into darkness, a crossing of the inner desert, a reconstruction that happens from within, without spectacle, without witnesses. You do not return the same, and you do not return to the same place either, because what you endured during your symbolic death makes you see the world with different eyes. And when you look at the world again, you no longer see a system. You see a prison disguised as normality, and it's no longer possible to fit in. Anubis accompanies you in this rebirth not as a savior but as a guide. He does not interfere. He observes. Because rebirth is not something someone does for you. It is something that only happens when you decide to go through the inner hell and return with the keys to your own prison. And when you return truly dirty, scarred with pain and whole for the first time, the world feels it. Not because you scream, but because your presence carries something that cannot be faked. Coherence. You are not waiting for your first symbolic death. It has already happened. And more than once. You just didn't realize it. It came disguised as a breakup, a dismissal, a failure, a loss that emptied you. It arrived without warning when you had to let go of something you believed was part of you. A relationship, a plan, a social image. And there, on that cold ground of loss, you died inside. But he didn't die for nothing. He died so he could rebuild himself with more truth. Even if at the time you only felt pain, every deep crisis is a rehearsal for death. Every moment when the world seems to fall apart is actually an invitation for you to descend into the depths of yourself. But the ego fears these falls. It runs to numb itself. It turns on the television, looks for someone, drowns itself in work, in addiction, in distraction. Because the journey through pain requires silence. And in silence the soul speaks. But the problem is that you learn to silence that voice. You called weakness what was called inner. You called depression what in many cases was a disconnection from your real essence. How many times has life pushed you to change and you resisted? How many times have you felt that you no longer fit into a place, an idea, a profession, a relationship, but stayed out of fear, habit, or emotional dependence? This artificial permanence is a form of postponed death, but it exacts a price. It saps your vitality, your enthusiasm, and your courage to exist fully. The soul does not want survival. It wants integration. She wants you to stop living divided, adapted, controlled. And so, when you ignore the signs, she allows everything to fall apart, so that you can see what really matters. And yet, even after so many falls, so much pain that tore you apart, you still think you are waiting for a great awakening. But it has already come. Several times. Only you were too busy defending yourself. Thinking it was bad luck. Calling it a spiritual crisis, what was in fact the birth of a new cycle of the soul trying to happen. But the birth of a being is painful. And like all births, it requires courage, openness, presence. It is not given by force. And it also does not happen on demand. It comes when you stop running away. You have already died emotionally, spiritually, energetically, and you survived. But now, Anubis proposes something different to you. It is no longer about surviving the fall. It is about take the crossing as part of your path. It's about looking at every past pain and saying, that was sacred too. Because only when you honor what broke you can use the shards to build something new. Something yours, something true. Something that no longer needs to be hidden behind masks of strength. Symbolic death, therefore, is not an end. It is a return. A return to the center that you abandoned in order to fit into the world. And each time this happened, a part of you did die. But today, by recognizing this, you can see they were not deaths in vain. They were misunderstood beginnings. They were portals opened inside, waiting for you to have the courage to cross. Most people fear death because they think of it as an end. But the true function of spiritual death, according to ancestral teachings, is not to end an existence. It is to open the way to what is real. Dying in this sense is to undress yourself. It is to remove everything that is not you. The roles you have assumed, the desires you have inherited, the fears you have internalized. Death, when it is not physical, is an unveiling. A revelation that behind what you believed yourself to be, there is a much broader awareness which cannot be named, only lived. This is why Anubis is not a god of destruction. He is a god of transition. He doesn't rip anything out of you. He just watches what needs to die. He doesn't impose the crossing. He is there, standing on the threshold between worlds, waiting for you to decide to cross over on your own. Because awakening is not given. It is conquered. And this conquest is not done with brute force, but with surrender. With surrender to the inevitable. with the courage to let go of what no longer sustains your soul. Anubis guides but does not carry. He opens the door. You choose to enter. When you cross this threshold, there are no guarantees. What dies inside you does not come back. The illusion once exposed can no longer be incorporated. It is like a torn veil. No matter how hard you try to sew it back together, you will always see the cracks. But it is in this space of rupture that something new can emerge. Not a new character, but a new presence. A way of being in the world that does not seek approval, that does not imitate models, that does not negotiate essence. Death as revelation is the beginning of freedom. Freedom not as escape, but as rooting in what is real, and what is real after all. The silence between thoughts, the consciousness that observes emotions without getting lost in them, the intuition that arises when the noise of the ego is silenced. The real is everything that survives the collapse of the image. It is what remains when everything else falls. And it is this space that Anubis protects. He does not protect your dreams. He does not protect your ego. He guards that which cannot be touched, the core of the soul. And only those who accept dying before death, those who choose to face the abyss and take a step without ground, get there. What awaits you after? The crossing is not an idealized heaven, nor a definitive answer. It is another way of walking. A lighter, more sober, more authentic way. You will become less noisy but more intense. Less explanatory but clearer. Less enchanted by promises and more committed to presence. Because those who have gone through symbolic death carry in their eyes something that cannot be falsified. The serenity of someone who has already lost everything and yet remained. Anubis won't save you, but he won't leave you alone either. He'll be there in the dark waiting for you to remember that the truth does not shine. It burns. And when this truth touches your skin, there will be no turning back, because you will have finally felt that which is eternal, the soul's call for a life that no longer needs to hide from death.